My inspiration goes back to Bauhaus, Memphis, anything geometric, op art, although I'll scour the internet because nowadays there's just so much more information out there. I don't know what genre you would fit these into, but it's sort of op and pop because my inspiration comes from both. I don't necessarily always do dogs, but the dogs are iconic, and it's iconic images I use. I need to use a familiar image because if I try and pare it down and abstract it with some op art pattern, you still need to recognize what it is. So I've basically, I'm using this kind of inspiration along with, which is abstract, along with sort of figurative inspiration, which can be anything from old masters to pop art, cartoons, and I can combine them to make something that's figurative and abstract. This is an example of the sort of language, the visual language I can adapt to most objects as long as they're quite familiar. So everyone would recognize that. This is a poster that I came across about 30 years ago, for example, from Andy Warhol's Mickey Mouse. And just to show you how I can adapt that with Victor Vasarely's abstract art. So I've used a sort of cultural figurative piece and I'm mixing it with some op art and it's creating something like that. So it's got a 3D effect even though it's 2D. I sort of refer to them as flat sculptures. And what you've got going on with op art is you've got your brain telling you one thing and then the cognitive side and then your perception is telling you another. And normally that sort of creates some kind of perceptual ambiguity, so I've also added some elements of some very subtle laminated varnish spots that just add to that optical element over the top. But obviously if the original form itself isn't very recognizable or too original, you won't understand what's going on. So it's important that it's kind of very iconic, very familiar, and it just uses the sort of abstract element of these. It could be op art, but equally I've got like hundreds, and I just collect hundreds of different patterns and designs. And once I get to the stage of actually creating the 3D element, which is really tedious and it takes a long time, and it's the really creative bit is when I come to apply the texture, because in real time I can make it larger, rotate it, take an element out of it, or just what I sometimes do for the more complicated pieces is sort of render off lots of them and then layer them up and then choose the bits that are working around a sort of 3D element. The way I work is if there's a character I like, I have to sort of take a side shot and a front shot, and then I get the influence of an op artist like Victor Vasarely, and it will create something hopefully new but still recognizable. So it's important that it's sort of iconic and familiar in the first place, otherwise it's completely lost, because by the time I'm trying to sort of abstract it, it will disappear. And hopefully the idea is that I can change the original pattern enough and then change the actual what you're familiar with to create something that's new. It's very difficult to get like a nice hard edge, so I have to use different techniques to try and get that, and it's quite slow as well, but it's enjoyable, but it does take a long time. This is a really big artist, I don't know if you know him, Cause. So I mean, it's not the same sort of technique, but he's got the same subject matters as me, so that's sort of my sort of take on it. It's a completely different sort of process. And this is, say, Victor Vasarely, an inspiration from the 60s that I've adapted to popular sort of iconic image, just to create something that's figurative and abstract and sort of hopefully become more familiar, more recognizable. And that's just an example of the sort of shade I will put on the top of a sort of flat geometric pattern to give it some kind of 3D element. You can't really see it, but you are seeing it. You just, it's not that obvious, it's quite subtle, but it gives it more of a three-dimensional feel. But reference can come from a model or a toy. So I have done added some inspiration from old masters, so that's a Holbein. And this was another character by an artist called George Gower. And so I've created him in 3D, but then applied lots of different elements to him. You can see I can just apply it to anything that inspires me, which can be from popular art and pop art. So it's kind of a bit difficult to sort of pigeonhole because I'd call it pop stroke op art. Some people have even called it pop psychedelic because the op art does come from that sort of psychedelic era, and so it's very linked in with that. This might be mixed media because I'm taking the original eyes, so they will be part painted. But I haven't got into those. I've got other more sort of cultural iconic sort of pop arty pieces that I would probably do first before I can consider doing these. You won't be seeing these for a while.